Long leaves lay this way and that, a snapshot of how they fell. Farther on, under the bright maples, I picked up a candy wrapper, red, white, and blue, like the political signs all over town. Last night was trick or treat, decreed by the township, not All Hallows Eve, nor even the eve of Halloween. It's the second Friday after the first Monday before All Souls. I'm never sure, but it's nothing to do with anything hallowed anyway. I guess it's a bid to neutralize the dead by changing their schedule. But the dead have no schedule. The damp of the ground after a night's rain calls forth a damp of skin that corresponds with it. Puddles mirror half naked limbs of trees, their hauteur brought down to the street in patches. The yarn of my cape is Hellion red, from days gone by when people crocheted, probably illegal now for environmental reasons. The Hellion red, I mean. When, when it was time to turn toward home, it rained a little, just teasing, then warmed. A squirrel was gnawing something in a disgruntled way. The small mountain to the south was green and gold, swathed in mist. I wanted to edit the foreground out of it. The plastic playground, cinder block school, cracker box house. It didn't work. My son remembers a time when his life was happier. He's not sure what changed. Was it when the neighbors turned against us? When his little playmates were instructed to shun him? Was it before that, even, when we moved here from that country place where he was chasing rabbits? Things are expected of him now that never were in preschool, and some problems never quite resolve. Square roots that go on past the decimal point forever, or until you stop counting, whichever comes first. Good evening. My name is Charles Carr, and welcome to Philly Loves Poetry, a collaboration between the Philadelphia Moonstone Arts Center and Philly Cam. The focus of our program is to give our listeners and our viewers the experience of the rich culture of poetry in the Philadelphia area. And tonight we have a very special poet, one who I've really come to like because I've met up with her on various public readings. And when she reads a poem, she always makes me stop and think, and it always registers with me among maybe 20, 30 poems that have been read by other people. And that's Cleveland Wall. So let's give a welcome to Cleveland. Cleveland is a poet, editor, and teaching artist living in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. She was born in Philadelphia, grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. Her first full-length collection, Let X Equal X, was released by Kelsay Books in 2019, and we'll be discussing that book this evening. Current obsessions include dream life, embodied poetics, ephemeral art, and the power of persistent incremental change. As an artist, Cleveland enjoys experimenting with form and performance, appropriated forms, predictive text, erasure, devised theater, and extemporaneous poetry. Cleveland performs with poetry improv troupe, No River Twice, of which she is the founding member, and with the Starry Eyes, a poetry guitar duo whose debut album, The Garden of Terrors and Delights, dropped in January 2020. As a teaching artist, Cleveland enjoys working with both children and adults, often incorporating visual and performing arts elements in her workshops. So good evening, Cleveland. It's great to finally have you on Philly Loves Poetry. So I wanted to start our discussion actually going back to some of the things that you mentioned in your bio, which was very exciting, is is dream life, embodied poetics, ephemeral art, and also later is mentioned erasure and devised theater. Can you discuss with us, how these elements and what you call obsessions really impact your poetry?
Well, dream life has been a thing I've been thinking about for many years. I have a long-term project in process about the city of dreams. That's basically the space that our minds construct when we're dreaming, and it has certain rules that are consistent. Like if you try to learn lucid dreaming, one of the things you do is study the properties of dreams so that you will know when you're in one and can start to control the dream a little bit. The way I feel about dreaming is that like I have memories that are things that happened in dreams. So the experience that happens to you while dreaming is real experience, even if it doesn't happen on the physical plane. So that is a thing that I've been thinking about for quite a while. And sort of a flip side of that is embodiment, because I spend a lot of time dreaming and in my head, and embodiment is kind of the opposite of that. So at a certain point, I realized, like, as a culture, I think a lot of people are talking about embodiment now because as a culture, we've gotten increasingly abstracted so that the idea of a thing stands in for the thing. And I'm trying to pay attention to actual physical experience in my poems. I felt like this was a new thing I started doing, and then when I looked back, I realized that's actually been happening for a while before I realized I was doing that. And let's see, what else was I going to?
Well, in the second paragraph, about your erasure, I think that people would be confused on, in poetry, erasure as as an approach. So can you speak to that just briefly before we, go further?
Sure. So erasure is a type of poetry where you arrive at a poem by starting with a block of prose, and usually it's done by crossing out the parts that you don't want in the poem. And I do a certain kind of erasure where the words in the poem have to be contiguous, because I'm actually physically cutting out whatever doesn't belong to the poem.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that mirrored my general process for making poems as well.
Is it like, when I looked at that model that was just put up on the image, that was put on the screen, I was thinking of found poetry, where people do go in and maybe they'll take a document and they'll black out, parts of it and create a poem out of, what's left. I know found poetry is, other things than like text. I mean, people take, like something, a caution sign down on a railroad, and they somehow make a poem out of it. So that's very interesting, and interesting as well as also to go further with our discussion of your poetry is just the title of your book, X equals X, and your use throughout the book of mathematical formulas which divide the various sections of poems that you have in the book, which I found very fascinating. I can't say I understand those formulas because my strong point was never mathematics, But I just wanted to say, interesting when I saw that. I had a book called Strange Attractors, and it's poems of love and mathematics. And it's a very fascinating book, and it has some of the greatest poets ever that not going to use mathematics, but reference science. So, can you share with us why the title, and then B, you're using those other images as part of the book?
Yeah. Well, when I went to put together my manuscript, it being a first book, it sort of is sort of an introduction. Like this is all the stuff I've been working on, and I found there was a surprising amount of mathematical reference in the poems. And actually, the sort of frontispiece poem is where the title comes from. It's a poem in the form of a proof that begins with, I thought, I don't want to be too ambitious in trying to prove something in a poem, so I started with the identity x equals x, let x equal x, which I am almost certain I came across in an algebra text at some point. Of course, it's also the Laurie Anderson song, Let X Equal X. But in this poem, it really is about just letting things be themselves. And that's the final graph in the third section, is the identity x equals x. The initial one is just a graph of the point 0, 0, x equals 0, y equals 0, and that is the origin. So that is the beginning of this consideration of where I am in the world, right? So that's the point right in the middle, is the point 0, 0.
Okay. Well, that's really fascinating because I myself have had, not necessarily mathematics, but with science, the bringing together of science and poetry. And of course, there's a whole genre of poetry. I one time wrote a poem about string theory, but I really broke it down into my feeble understanding of string theory, which really worked out to be baseball. But anyway, you also bring science in very much into your poems, and they really do. They really do flow. Like, for example, the one poem, Uncertainty and the Collapsed Wave Function. And one of the great things about that poem is it makes the reader Google collapse of wave function. And when after I Googled it, and I said, okay, let's put this together. And then I reread the poem and I said, well, this is a representation because there is a process of collapse and it has to do with observation and time. So can you speak to that too, that fascinating you have with science and bringing and incorporating in your poems?
Yeah, well, I feel like the fields of math and science are just loaded with metaphors for other aspects of life. Is one reason that happens. The other is they are sort of similar enterprises, poetry and science, because you, in both cases, are trying to get at a truth. And so they seem to fit together really naturally. If you happen to be paying attention to science things, which I just find interesting, you find a lot of metaphors in there.
Yeah. And so also you have a definite, what I would say, fascination with, a perspective that kind of focuses in almost like a microscope on things and objects. And what I saw a number of these, and I'm fascinated with that because it reminds me of, Neruda's odes, and it reminds me of Merwin and others. And you do it very, very well. and for example, poems like Vad Mikum or Bird Not Moving or Pas de Deux, where you really, I think, focus down on things that others really don't take time to stop and look at that, that phenomenon and reality. So, can you talk about that style that you have of kind of zeroing in on something and bringing it to life? Something small and insignificant to some people.
Yeah, I feel like when you see something like like the twirling leaf in the Pas de Deux poem, the thing about it that strikes you is this is like something else, right? Because poets are compulsive metaphor makers, and something about that happening strikes you as, okay, there's something significant in this, and then you explore it in the poem to see what it is. There's another poem like that, Confetti, which I'm planning to read later,
Right.
where happened to be reading The Pleasures of Work and Sorrow by Alain de Botton when I came upon this little bit of confetti on the ground, and it made me see that in a different way. So there are little images that sort of synthesize what you've already been thinking about, and they call out to you to pursue what that connection is.
It's evocative. I mean, that these objects and these things that stop you, create that opportunity to expand and explore it. I mean, for example, also the one poem I found fascinating, Confessions of a Fallen Tootsie Pop.
Right.
That's absolutely wonderful. Um, in an interview that you gave to Lynn Fanuc, which I found on Google search, and you responded to a question of hers about describing your creative writing process, which really fascinated me. And you indicated there's a pre-poem period of material gathering. Then the writing is a subtractive process. There's a kind of erasure poem I do sometimes where I look for a thread of contiguous words in a block of prose that are a poem. Then I cut away all the words that are not the poem. This process mimics the way I write poems. I follow a line or an idea to see if it becomes a poem. Then, if it does, I cut away whatever is not a poem. That's fascinating. Can you discuss that further?
Sure. So it takes a really long time for me to write poems. Usually the thing that I end up writing about, it will come out as a poem like 5 months after the initial stimulus, which is why I'm bad at topical things. But what I end up with is sort of a cloud of associations and ideas relating to the thing, whatever the initial stimulus is. And then I have to see which parts are going to stick together and actually form the substance of the poem. Mm-hmm. And then let go of all the other things, however attractive they might have been.
So this isn't just the genre that you have of erasure poems. This is a process that you use just as part of your writing poetry and, writing your poems, which I really, find fascinating. You start somewhere almost like a project and you start to cull it away until you get to the essence of what you really want to create a poem about,
Mm-hmm.
which is really fascinating. So also in your biography is this other, not only poetry, but theater, and then these musical collaborations with your husband. And I'm very fascinated by the improv uh, poetry group, and what that is, how that relates to your poetry. Can you speak to that, the improv poetry?
Yeah, that's an interesting group. It's we've lately started calling it an interactive reading because some people thought we were going to make up the poems on the spot. What the thing that is improvised is the order of the reading, which is led by the audience. So we all start with a randomly selected poem by one of the poets, and then the audience decides what they would like to hear next, right? Like, so if you've been hearing about dogs, someone might want a counterpoint. Well, I want to hear about cats now. And then the poets furiously search for if they have a cat poem, and they offer whatever they have that meets what the audience is asking for. And then there's a consensus of where they want to go next. And the reading continues on this way with the audience steering how it goes.
And how big is the use of the audience or the group that you're working with?
We'll usually have about 6 of us. There are 11, I think 11 now in the troupe, maybe 12. I've lost count. There are 11 or 12 of us in No River twice, and but at any given reading, there might be just like 6 or 8 of us there.
Mm-hmm.
And then the audience, well, that will vary. Sometimes the audience is the same size that we are, and
Okay.
And they just pitch in with where they want the reading to go.
And
Also, the other thing, this is sort of an improv thing that happens, is that we jot down the connecting lines, like whatever it was that led to the next poem, whatever it was in your poem that connected to the previous poem. And then someone, usually Chad Frame, will construct a cento while the reading is going. And then at the end, you get to hear the sort of collaborative poem that's been created by how the audience steered the reading.
Mm-hmm. And that's fascinating. And where does this take place? Do you have it live, or is it virtual? Or?
Well, we started out doing live performances. Our first one was actually at Fergie's, and we were there just a few weeks ago. It was kind of in full circle. But of course, with the pandemic, we moved online. So we do some of our performances online now.
And the musical collaborations that you and your husband have, how is that expressed in poetry? Is it merely essentially a backup of you reading your poems, or is it maybe your poems representing the music as well, or a balance of the two?
It really works more like a mashup, like, when you take 2 distinct songs and you fit them together, you find ways that their rhythms fit together. So my husband plays classical guitar repertoire, so those things are already existing. And then my poems I don't write to a particular piece, but we sort of do trial and error to see, like, well, I think this piece might fit with that poem, and we try them out until it fits. And the correspondences are sometimes amazing. It may be because subconsciously I'm always listening to this music because I live in the house with it.
Right.
It's the soundtrack of our household. But really, rather than one thing backing the other up, it's like 2 fully orchestrated things that are just fit together.
So, before we ask you to read some of your poems, and by the way, I want to apologize to you because I read your poem, October Ramble, but I did not give the title of that poem, which is in your book. So I apologize for that. And that's a wonderful poem. I really like the way you built that on so many different layers. So what is the next phase of what you want to accomplish in your poetry? Because I know you talked about this city of dreams, and that sounds really fascinating.
Yeah, I would like to put my attention back on that again. I sort of set it aside. It's sort of like the cobbler's child. It's it gets pushed aside for other projects. But I have a substantial part of it written. There just are more aspects of the city of dreams that have to be explored, and it has to be made into a cohesive thing. So I think that is the next thing that I'm going to give my attention to.
Okay, well, I'm looking forward to that. Really, to that book of poems, because I think in reading your book of poems, you really do stretch the reader into pathways that they're not usually ready to go in terms of poems, but the end product, what you give us, is really stunning and remarkable. As I said in the beginning, when I've been at readings where you have been reading your poems, there's just something about every poem that I've heard from you that somehow leaves that kind of impression on me, and I think that's a great quality, that you think about that poem. And not that I'm not pleased with the other people's poems. There are wonderful poets and poems, but you have that quality to really gets people's attention. So speaking about attention and about poems, I think I would love to move to have our audience hear you read your poems, and I'll just say the floor is yours.
Okay, super. Well, let's see. I have put together a little program here. I'm going to remind myself of my set list here. So I thought I would start off with the kind of preface poem of my book, which is the title poem, and it is called Proof. Where X is a giant oak leaf which falls on my head as I walk the cemetery path below, let X equal X. Why I fasten it to my hair, and is it a sign from O'Doherty forebears, people of the oaks, claiming my troubled head? Why I mention it to poets who tell me it's good luck? Why it becomes remote by association with potential augury? This set is null. Let Lorentz equations express the twist of its stem, the curl of its lobes, the air current alternately propelling, resisting its flight. Let X factorial represent the many possible outcomes, and let them have their parallel elsewhere days. The identity X equals X is sufficient to describe the moment X has come all the way down from its high branch to touch my crown. Therefore, let X equal X. And another poem from the book is Delayed Gratification. This is, of course, based on the famous Stanford marshmallow experiment. In the experiment, children were given a marshmallow each and promised another if they could wait. Now tasted better to some than two, the whole pillowy mass filling their mouths at once, soft but resistant, dense with couched air. The study followed to see who succeeded. To no one's surprise, the patient ones ended up with more in life, as in the lab. I ate my marshmallow early, and now I'm hungry, but not for marshmallows. What else have you got behind your two-way mirror, Doctor? Okay, this poem is a little bit older poem. It's called I Never Think About the Bomb. And it's not because I live and breathe it, like language or gravity or indoor plumbing. I think about those things. Consider the stench and filth of a chamber pot, the lusty gardy-loo, announcing, perhaps too late, the flinging of its contents into the street below. And that gardy-loo is from the French garde de l'eau, just putting it mildly. I suppose there were always meteors, ice ages, other evolutionary hiccups that could spell doom. Maybe that's why this dark cloud feels inevitable. The others are rare and unpredictable, and above all, out of our hands. But come to think of it, so's the bomb, unless you are the fellow with his finger on the button, which mostly you're not. If I think about the bomb at all, it's the kitschy stock footage of duck and cover, mushroom cloud, and those oh-so-futuristic fallout shelter signs. It was a big deal back then, like reefer and rock and roll. Those girls who went hysterical over the Beatles or whomever seemed quaint now. I used to at least feel frivolous for not thinking about it. It was important to wring one's hands in the secret belief that thought mattered. Well, the Cold War's over now anyway. I've idly dreamt, under looming deadlines, perhaps the end of the world will come and save me. But it never ends. Even when it ends, the having been remains, like the hush of treefall, where no one's listening. Okay, now this poem is the one that you mentioned, Charles, uncertainty and the uncollapsed wave function. And the you in this poem is actually a composite of people that I have lost track of, because that's a thing that I do. If you're not in front of my face, I might lose track of you. And so it occurs to me, this being televised and then later archived online, that possibly one of these people will see me reading this poem. So if you are a person that I have lost track of and you think this poem might be about you, well, maybe it is.
It'll be like America's Most Wanted.
Right? And this poem is going to hunt you down and find you. All right. So here is the poem. Uncertainty and the uncollapsed wave function. You could be living in Mexico now, married to a snake wrangler, your morning coffee become a ritual beyond my imagining. The water drawn through some jury-rigged plumbing arrangement and boiled in one of those old star-speckled enamel kettles. It could be cowboy coffee, boiled in the water and then carefully decanted. Or it could be just the familiar burble hiss of any modern drip. How should I know? I've never been to Mexico. You might even have gone over to Instant. Anything could happen during such a long interval. You could be in Wyoming, on a ranch or something, on that high, hard-bitten ground. The macrame owl hanging in your window, you don't even remember where it came from. maybe a housewarming gift from some other place you lived, in the breath-fogged glass lit by a weak tea winter sun. Wherever you've ended up, I'd guess it is someplace rocky, but what do I know? Whichever way a thing was headed when last I checked is how I imagine it carrying on until I hear otherwise. Last time I saw you, you were headed west and vanished into a bank of neon swirling fog. So, as far as I know, you've lived inside the fog all this time. Or you continued on west, across the Pacific Ocean, and have arrived in China by now, and are thriving in that thriving new economy we keep hearing about. Sometimes I Google old friends, trying to figure out what's become of everybody, but rarely are the results relevant. I searched for myself, and I wasn't there either, unless way out on page 37, I didn't look that far. I searched for you this afternoon, but the only instance of your name was a mention on the MySpace page of somebody else who was looking for you. I'd been reading an old journal entry in which you lent me $10. Later, I lent you 50, which you repaid with one crisp grant that I kept for years, setting it aside just in case, then finding it again upon rearranging the closets or moving house. Each time a surprise, a smart green time traveler smelling of leather, and that good solid banister scent of paper money. I forget how I ended up spending it. And even if I wrote that in my journal, I would no more know in which month or year to look for that than I would know where to look for you. You could be dead, the thought occurs to me at last. For all I know, that very night in the fog, or later under a blistering sun, or in some linoleum kitchen, you might have come to grief. For all I know, you are long gone from this world. And here I am still holding your full kit of possibilities, all uncollapsed for now. The handsome stranger unmet, the child unborn, the fatal collision, a mere fancy. In my mind, no more likely than your life with the snake wrangler. Your letters of passage are all here, still valid. I will keep them for you to spend some other day.
Well, I mean that is so exciting, that poem, because when you link it to quantum theory, you say, well, how's it? It does. If one really goes in and looks at the description of wave function, collapsing wave function,
Mm-hmm.
unless I'm crazy, one really follows that in this, because it's this. It's set up, and it will you only have essentially resolution when you do observe this
Mm-hmm.
person. And I really felt it fascinating, and it would be fascinating for people is okay, go in and make sense of wave theory or wave function yourself and see how it fits for you. So I love that poem.
Cool, thank you. So I wonder who will be seeing that. Okay, so another theme that came up, surprising amount of math in this manuscript, and also I'm surprised at how often the poem is about being wrong about something. Like, I'm surprised that I admitted that so often in my poems, because that's bad PR hygiene. But apparently I did just have a bunch of poems about being wrong about things. And this one is one of those. It's called Once I Thought I Was Wrong, but I was mistaken. That was a favorite saying of my dad's. Once I thought I was wrong, but I was mistaken. My first pets were fish. I was keen, named everything in the aquarium, each fish and even the plants, Philip and Jeffrey. And lo, 2 water snails stowed away in the foliage. A pair of gentlemen callers welcomed as accidental pets, which spawned an infestation. Oh, but they were never that. I had named them, Xavier and Ignatius. How can a thing fall out of being once given a name? A name will carry you even through hell if you hold fast to it. Or so goes, blessed, unfalsifiable, the lore. But what of the gentle brontosaurus that is no more and never was? Head of one apatosaurus, body of another. This specious species arose not from primordial soup, but from the wishful will to find the next big thing. We all believed this fiction, figuring paleontologists ought to know. And poor demoted Pluto, once counted 9th amongst our planets. What now of the handy mnemonic it neatly completed? Our very earnest mother, no, my very earnest mother just served us 9, what? Just served us nothing. Maybe I loved Pluto for its eccentricity, skewed orbit, outlier aloofness. In retrospect, the many anomalies should have tipped us off. This was not one of our own, stood out in left field watching the clouds go by. It belongs to another tribe, another class of object altogether, nothing to do with us. Is it you I long for, my lost pets? I know you are false. I do not love you. But I loved thinking I knew how the stars were situated, what the bones meant dug up in the American West. How tiring it is forever revising one's map of the world. Each supplanting discovery, each step closer to true feels more unsteady. Oh, my brontosaurus, my Pluto, my bonus water snails. Is it to some graveyard at the edge of town you've gone? Are you languishing in the Kuiper Belt, that junkyard of disused forms that cool from star to rock and stand as monuments to a lovelier reckoning of themselves? And there's a funny thing about this poem, which is that sometime after I wrote it, both Pluto and the Brontosaurus were reinstated, simultaneously ruining my poem and proving its point. So I still read the poem anyway, because who knows, they could be debunked again. You never know. Science is always marching on. Okay, the other one I wanted to read is the one I mentioned earlier, Confetti, True Story, that actually happened in Philly. We were staying at, I think, the Holiday Inn for my husband's census training when this happened. Confetti. Because the ice machine was broken and I had to go up to the next level, bucket under my arm, because I was parched nigh unto death, my achy bare feet took me past the place where 3 bits of confetti winked from the hotel hallway carpet. 3 penises cut out of chrome-finished plastic. 2 pink, 1 silver. And my mind wandered to the manufacture of penis-shaped confetti. Pictured huge industrial punches punching out sheet after sheet of pink penises, silver penises, chubby, cartoonish, Someone was in charge of designing that silhouette. Someone likely else caused a die to be made to cut the shape out. The many replicas were packaged and transported to a shop and inventoried, then sold to a bachelorette or someone just fond of penises, and somehow strewn on the carpet like so much profligate seed. I put these 3 strays in my pocket and carried on in search of a functioning ice machine. Okay, let's see. I also wanted to read this poem. This is a poem for Mary Anning, a fossil hunter way back in the 19th century who made some pretty substantial finds, contributions to paleontology, but has mostly been remembered by the tongue twister, She Sells Seashells by the Seashore. She was operating out of Lyme Regis, which is on the Dorset coast and not far from this natural bridge called the Durdle Door. So that is the title of the poem. The Durdle Door for Mary Anning. There's a dearth of dormice at the Durdle Door and Dorset, nor are ichthyosaurs to be found any more. The moors cry with heather, its feathery wisps like the will of the worker blown this way and that on the whims of the breeze. But the watchers, those turtles, come hurtling through the Durdle Door and Dorset, and a dame in a dirndl and corset combs the teeth of the cliff for significant crusts. Crustacean or coprolite lightning strikes on the regular and irregular alike, impartial particle accelerator arbitrating from on high, and I miss the seaside, even its loud shushing like an obnoxious matron. Prima materia, crucible crux, make me a darning needle that zips through the eye of that ancient arch to alight on a heather spire and sway with weighty sigh the sensible stem. Also, fun fact about that poem, I did not know at the time I was writing this that Mary Anning was struck by lightning as a child. I guess it just seemed like a place where you might get struck by lightning, and sure enough, she was. Fortuitous coincidence. Okay. Well, maybe less than fortuitous for her, but that's a bit of news about that poem. Okay, now this song, I just accidentally called this a song, but it's a poem. Well, it's called a love song for my body. So that is how I went to song instead of poem. And this was maybe one of the earlier poems that was moving me towards embodiment as a concept and a point of attention. Love song for my body. My love for you is no longer at the bottom of the pool, my love, and as no one would have fished it out, least of all you, modest thing, I can only guess it has gone amphibious, flapped onto land on webbed feet, its razor gills sucking the harsh air, searching for you in the rectilinear house. Listen, it wheezes below your window, all its monster longing pitched at your indifferent head, and now it has found the key under the mat, for it is a clever beast, my love for you. It fumbles with the lock until the bolt clicks free and crashes through the darkened kitchen on its way to you, my love. For you it mounts the creaking stair. For you it comes all ungainly, swaying in the doorway, your piercing shrieks in vain your knitting needles hurled, the dustpan shuffle. Nothing deters my love for you. Oh, darling, be adaptive. Come to the night lagoon. There are fish aplenty, glittering in starlit shoals. The beds of seaweed, rocking gently, gravity itself suspended. Come, be buoyant, my love. Or, if you must, faint dead away in the creature's arms. See how it carries you home. And I have one more poem. This one is inspired by Robin Wall Kimmerer's books, Braiding Sweetgrass. It has an epigraph from her. So in this book, one of the things she talks about is the way that language reflects and or shapes a people's thoughts. Like their way of thinking is very much related to how their language functions. And so she was studying the Potawatomi language and found that almost everything in the natural world is expressed as a verb, which as for a native speaker of English, it's really hard to imagine how that works grammatically, but it works if you're speaking Potawatomi, apparently. So the epigraph is this: I grabbed the dictionary and flipped more pages, and all kinds of things seemed to be verbs, to be a hill, to be red, to be a long sandy stretch of beach. Appling. Who is being an apple tree? My friend over there with the shady leaves. My sister with white blossoms in her hair. Apple's temptation, sweet-fleshed and comely. Apple sister roots herself, entwines with honey pear cousin, dips into mycelium buzzing news of the forest. Who is being a forest? Who shades the moss? Who wears the lichen mantle, stands sentry at the mouth of the river? Who is the river? Did anyone ask to become the summer evening air, sedulous with dew? Who dews in clear globes, remembering cloudburst? She will do, has done, will do. Who am I breathing tree breath, if not tree kin, if not apple and worm, bacterium and spore? When I was rhizoming, the mineral rising surged through while you were beaming nitrogen into the soil, which earths tirelessly for so long, for so long. But what glad work it is.
That's
Thanks.
really wonderful. We still have a little more time. If you have a short poem you want to read, it's up to
Oh,
you. One observation I want to make is that when I hear you're reading, of course, I see that theatrical, but I'm almost have a feeling that you're reading from Shakespeare, like a soliloquy, and it's really marvelous the way you read your poems, and it's really glorious.
well, thanks, Charles. And thanks for having me also
Yeah.
on the show. This has really been fun. Let's see, do I have another shorty? I did prepare. Let's see, I have this is a good one for tonight because it has been raining like crazy.
Okay.
So this is a little short poem to end on. Exit sign. The rain has been pelting down for days. The ground is soaked, the cinema too full. The windshield dream lapses, big dots, little dots. An exit sign is pointing up, but the road doesn't go that way.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for
Thank
this. It
you,
was
Charles.
a really great interview, very enjoyable listening to you read your poems, and I hope to see more of you and reading your poems, at the various venues. Um, and I want to thank our, Erin Fallon, who is our technical director that makes this all happen and brings us very beautiful people onto the screen each time. So thank you very much, Erin. She's hiding behind the scenes there, but Philly Cam does such an extraordinary job in making these events happen. One day we hope to be back in the studio, but this is really great. And I couldn't leave without saying a couple of things. Number one, I want to point out that Larry Robin is having his 80th birthday on November 19th. There's a celebration going to be at Fergie's. So, Larry and Moonstone do so much to advance the love of poetry in this area, and including poets from throughout the world now that we go virtual. So, as a birthday present for Larry, is to go on our website, moonstoneartscenter.org, and to support us, to a gift for Larry, and a gift to Moonstone for all they have done for poetry. And it continues. I mean, the publishing of books, uh, the venues at Fergie's, these virtual readings, these thematic um, anthologies that Larry creates, based on what is happening in our time, what is happening in our country and our world right now. And Larry, what he does is he tries to make this all expressed through poems and poetry, and it's very, very, very powerful. So let's give a shout out to Larry at all times, but now his 80th birthday is coming up, and let's pay homage to him and all that he has done for poetry in this community. So thank you all for watching. I thought it was a fantastic broadcast tonight, and I look to have you on again next month. We'll have a different theme and a different poet or poets, and it should be great. Thank you all.